Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys Football 2023 NFL Draft Season. We are ripping through our position rankings, getting through the film, finalizing our position rankings until about the Combine Senior Bowl. Then we might make some changes, getting into the wide receiver class. This is easily the most exciting class to talk about always. Like, the wide receiver group is so highly valued by the NFL. Like, I don't think this class is necessarily as good as some classes that we've seen the last couple of years. That being said, the NFL is going to take wide receivers high. That is what we've seen. Before we get into it, I just want to say thank you to you guys. You guys have been absolutely awesome with the support, and we really do appreciate it. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Go check out our quarterback ranks. We did that 3 days ago, I believe. We had some heated arguments about that quarterback class. And again, if you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing. Dill, I'm going to kick it off to you. Let's start with our wide receiver one. We both have the same one, Quentin Johnston. Tell us a little bit about him.
I mean, you just look at what he did this last year and even the year before when that offense wasn't cooking the same way. But a guy who's just like the most physically dominant player in this draft class by far. I mean, what he can do going up, making contested catches, how he tracks the football deep, which is a huge skill. I think you always talk about how much people underrate it, but I mean, you'd see the ball floating up there and the corner would be have no idea where it was, and then Johnson would swoop in and get it. But also along with that obvious part of his game, he was a big guy who could create a lot of separation around the shorter parts. Like on 3rd and 3, they could get him on a quick screen and he'd make that play for him. So just a guy who I feel like brings everything, along with just a super physically imposing body and ability at deep balls.
Yeah, Quentin Johnston, wide receiver one, not necessarily the best wide receiver we've seen in college. Like, I think Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith-Njigba in 2021, when you watch the film, you say, okay, those guys might have played better at the collegiate level. But when you talk about translating to the next level, Quentin Johnston and his ceiling is silly. I think he could truly be one of the best wide receivers in the whole entire National Football League. Again, 6'4", 215. I echo all the things you said about his tracking ability, the ability to go up and make contested catches. But what really stands out to me, and this is a guy I was really high on in the summer too, is he's 6'4", 215 pounds. It's not necessarily surprising he has that long vertical speed. But what really kind of separates him, in my opinion, is that ability to separate in those intermediate routes. And you said it best. Like, when it was 3rd and 5 and you needed somebody to work the middle of the field and pick up the yards to get the first down, like, Quentin Johnston was that dude. He can separate on those intermediate routes, which makes a matchup nightmare. If you stick a bigger corner on him, like, he's got the short area quicks to beat him, and a smaller guy can't really deal with the physicality Quentin Johnston plays with. Another thing that I just absolutely love about him, and again, I don't get to talk about too much of prospect's character. 3rd-year captain, so like he's a highly respected dude within that locker room. And he was a guy that through the first 3 games, he only had 10 or 11 catches, continued to play hard. You didn't see any social media posts. He wasn't upset. And another thing you notice, and this becomes very obvious, he is a dominant blocker. Like 6'4", 215 pounds, blocks his tail off, which you don't normally see a top wide receiver in the country doing at the collegiate level. Quentin Johnston does that. For all those reasons, I just think he's the clear wide receiver one. And then there's a little bit of a dip. And then there's 2 guys here. And I'll talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba, who comes in as my wide receiver 2 next. Dill, I'll kick it to you. What do you see in Jackson Smith-Njigba's game, and where is he on your list?
I mean, just a guy who doesn't really have a hole in what he does. Like, he's super smart. He felt like he was always finding his way into open spaces against the good teams. Like, you think when Ohio State needed plays against Michigan in the 2021, he was there to make them. When they needed plays in the Rose Bowl, I mean, that's maybe as good of a play as from a wideout I've ever seen in my life. Like, he just was doing everything. He was catching deep balls. He was making every play for that whole team, and just kind of a really refined, good player.
And when you go back and watch, I loved it. He's my wide receiver too, and there's a little bit of separation between him and Jordan Addison for me. And he's a guy that I'm way higher than most of the draft community, it seems like. Everyone's talking about, like, he doesn't have ideal size. Yeah, I get it. He plays most of his reps from the slot. I get that. He's not going to be a burner, which everyone loves to talk about. Oh, he's not going to run sub 4.4. Like, I don't care, because when you turn on the film in 2021, he's the best wide receiver in this class. Like, technically, he understands the position, and there's a reason. CJ Stroud had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, two guys who are dominating in the NFL as rookies, and Jackson Smith-Njigba was the leader on that team in terms of pass catching yards. And it's because he gets it. He lines up in the slot. If you are doing man coverage, he's going to separate. The short area quickness is elite. But when it is zone coverage, he just understands where to sit routes down, where to find the throwing lanes. And when you talk about a quarterback's best friend, Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be that dude.
Doesn't drop the football. And that again, like, I feel like people underrate it, but then you see some of these guys we'll talk about later, there were some drops. And when you are a player like Jackson Smith, where you're going to probably make your money is being able to make 3rd and 6 or that type of downage, you can't drop the ball, and he doesn't. And again, just when we talk about a guy, you kind of like, well, you try to find holes in him, and all you can maybe talk about is size and potential.
Size and speed. That's all it is.
Everything else he does really well.
And one other thing I want to say is, like, you take a look at what NFL wide receivers are making the biggest impact at the next level. It's more the route runners. It's more the heady wide receivers who are really, really good running routes and creating separation. Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson. All those guys weren't necessarily coming out of college. Cooper Kupp ran a 4.62. Like, they weren't physically imposing dudes. And yeah, you have the DK Metcalfs, the Jamar Chases, the AJ Browns, who are also doing their thing because they're elite athletes. But a lot of these wide receivers that are having the most success are the guys who just get to position. And I feel like those are the wide receivers on offenses that are the best in the country, the best in the league. And Jackson Smith-Njigba was a dude that I think you get that with him. Dale, let's get to your wide receiver 2 here, Jordan Addison.
Yeah, and again, when you talk about these two guys, I think you're really splitting hairs.
Yeah, agreed.
When you look at Jordan Addison, again, a guy, what are you going to say negative about Jordan Addison? A guy who caught everything that he was supposed to catch. He was constantly open. I think as smooth of a route runner as you'd really ever want to see. And I personally think he's got a little more speed than people give him credit for. I thought at USC was given more of a chance to make some more big plays, and you'd see him catching balls across the middle on some of those deep crossers, and he was really able to separate against some good good corners, like you say Clark Phillips, and that to me is where I kind of saw the progression in his game at USC, where he was given a little more opportunity to show what he can do beyond just being like one of the best possession wideouts we've ever really seen in college in the last 10 years or so. So that to me that's why I probably have him 2 over Smith-Njigba. But again, you're just splitting hairs between these two. They're both so good.
I agree, and I don't think you made a good point. I don't think people give Jordan Addison enough credit for like his athletic attributes. Like, I think he's a very, very good athlete. And one thing that you're seeing a lot of people say, and the truth of the matter is it's true. He's in my top 5. He's the only other guy that I feel comfortable playing out wide. The rest of these guys, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Josh Downs, Zay Flowers, who I have in my top 5, are much more of slot guys. They've taken the majority of their snaps in college from the slot. Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston, and it's really rare. You look at this wide receiver class, and it's a lot of dudes who come from the slot. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, because you see in the NFL, like, those slot wide receivers are making a massive impact on NFL offenses. But if you do want a guy who can be a wide receiver 1, play that X position on the boundary, Jordan Addison is probably the second best dude in the class in terms of that, behind Quentin Johnston. A lot to like about his game. He's not necessarily the most flashy guy with the long speed, but damn good wide receiver. Number 4 for me, I think he's number 4 for you as well, Josh Downs from UNC. Dill, a little bit about Josh Downs here.
And just, again, a guy who is very much the heartbeat of a really good offense.
Yes.
Someone who I think you take him out of that. Yeah, again, what you kind of would say, Drake May can play for sure, but I mean, he was by so far ahead the best wide on that team. What I think he gives you is like elite ball handling ability, for lack of a better word. Like, his ability to make plays with his feet is as good as anyone in this draft, I think. But I think what people don't appreciate about him, and it's probably because his size and his perceived ability as more of a slot receiver who that's what he does, like catch the ball and try to work with it. But he's a guy who at the end of the day was making a fair amount of contested catches deep down the field, and he could catch in traffic. So that's to me where he elevates himself to that number 4 spot above some of these other guys who I'd say are more pure slot wide receivers. Is that he has that in him.
Yeah, Josh Downs and Zay Flowers are very similar prospects for me. I think Josh Downs probably has a little bit more juice, and he's put it together in back-to-back seasons. He's only dropped 3 balls all year and 96 catches, 101 catches in 2021, and you look at why that UNC offense has been so dominant. Big time answer to that is because Josh Downs is one of the best wide receivers in the whole entire country. You mentioned it, and this does not get enough credit. Like his ability to go win in the red zone and make those combat catches, like a seven. This is according to PFF, and I don't love like quoting PFF stats. 72% contested catch rate, but you see that on the film. Like he can go up and make plays with the football in the air. He's not the biggest dude, but his hands are phenomenal, and he's another guy that gets to position. You don't have back-to-back years of that much production without just knowing how to play wide receiver at a high level. Josh Downs has done that, has proven that, and he's going to be a very, very big-time weapon.
Because what you're going to need to do is when he catches the ball, you got to tackle him quickly because he's one of those guys who transitions from catch to run in a savvy way as well as anyone. Like you see him catch some of those balls across the middle. He doesn't slow down. He doesn't break stride when he catches. And
smooth.
I think that's a lot of why he was able to make so many big plays at UNC, because if you weren't on him right away, he was breaking.
And one thing I love when I'm watching wide receivers on film is like, is he the guy when it matters? And Josh Downs, like if it was 3rd and 5, and we talked about this for Quentin Johnson at that number 1 spot, is when it matters, when you need a big time play, when you're in the red zone and it's 3rd and goal, when it's 3rd and 5 and you need to make something happen. The ball was going to Josh Downs. Everyone on the field knew it was going to Josh Downs, and Josh Downs very rarely let that offense down. And I think that is a good trait that you'll love to see, and I think a lot of NFL GMs would love to see. Number 5, and this is where, I mean, we agree on a lot of it. We both have Quentin Johnson. We have Jackson Smith-Njigba and Jordan Addison flipped. Josh Downs at 4. This is where we differentiate a little bit. Dill, you're number 5.
I have Jalen Hyatt, and I might just like people think I'm like a massive Tennessee fan because that's pretty much
Loves
I think Hendon Hooker's being slept on. I now think Jalen Hyatt, same thing. I mean, you just talk about a guy who what bothers me is I feel like he gets labeled as a pure speed burner type wideout who like he's like a one-trick pony a little bit. But in my opinion, you don't catch for almost 1,300 yards in the SEC if you don't have a little more to your game than hitting the big play. And it's not to say that's a bad thing because he is probably the fastest wideout in this class.
Oh, yeah.
Really smooth catching the ball down the field and tracks it well and doesn't drop it. And that's important because if you're in the NFL, you want to hit 60-yard touchdowns. So I don't get I think people try to knock him down for it, but I just don't think you put the numbers up that he's putting up if you can't do everything else. So I think when you look at him, I think he can work the field, and I think he runs good routes. The only issue you have with him is drops, and they are kind of an issue, big issue, because he did drop too many balls.
So Jalen Hyatt's a guy that I just have too many questions about. Like here, I'll start with the things I like because maybe in the past I've been too hard on Jalen Hyatt. Like he's going to be my wide receiver 7 as of right now, so I'll talk a little bit more about him when we do 6 through 10. Jalen Hyatt has game-breaking speed, and that matters in the NFL. We'll talk about Devin Achane at that running back spot. Like teams are going to gravitate to the fast players. When you have guys who are just faster than people trying to cover him, it helps your offense immensely. In terms of being a vertical threat, he's the best wide receiver in the class at that, maybe behind Quentin Johnson, but quite frankly, Jalen Hyatt might be better. Like he has that long speed, but what separates him from like some other busts that you've seen as just speedsters, like Ross, for example, coming out of Washington, was like his ball skills, when that ball's in the air, tracks it extremely well. And he, like, there's a lot to like about him. But I also, like, why I don't have him in my top 5 is I do have a lot of questions about his ability to be kind of a consistent wide receiver that's just not a deep threat specialist. Question 1 is, in Tennessee, you never saw him, like, deal with any sort of pressing. Because they run that unique offense where they stack wide receivers, he's never really getting hands on him. Like, does he have the ability? Like, he's not that big of a dude to deal with that physicality at the next level when you're dealing with cornerbacks who are long and they're tough. Second thing I have is I don't think he's as well-rounded of a wide receiver as some of these other guys? Like, is there anything more to his game than just dealing with deep threats? And in that Tennessee offense, you saw so much of stacking those wide receivers, creating mismatches where he's on a safety who's not very good in coverage, like you saw in Alabama, and he's just burning them. But it seemed like he was so much more schemed open than he was just, I'm going to go beat a really good cornerback here.
Yeah, and no, I get that. And again, it's not like I'm putting him at number 2 or above the Addison and
Jackson for the Jigba.
Like, I'm not putting him up with those two guys because, again, you're right. He hasn't shown the well-rounded game as much. But again, I think when you're that productive and you're that fast, I think at least the potential is there that you can kind of build the rest of your game out because, again, I just go back to it. You don't catch her as many yards as he did if you're all you can do is hit the big one.
Yeah, and my number 5, Zay Flowers. He's another guy that Josh Downs and him play very similar games. They both play a lot from the slot. Both have that vertical ability to win and hit those explosive plays. Zay Flowers is a guy that he's another guy who just gets to position really well. There's that Boston College offense stunk, and the only way they were moving the football down the field was going to Zay Flowers. He's very good after the catch, maybe one of the shiftiest players in this draft class. And again, you have some question marks about if he can play outside. I just don't think that necessarily matters. Zay Flowers is a name that you're going to see in the top 5 a lot. ROC loves him. I know Mike Renner from PFF loves him. I'm going to kick it to you. What are some guys outside of your top 5 that maybe were kind of on the fringe here, at least worth mentioning?
I mean, one guy I'm fascinated by is Cedric Tillman. And just to throw back to like the Tennessee is, oh yeah, I know the people. I mean, you might as well just put the burnt orange on, or not burnt orange, but the other orange now and just start riding with them. But again, he is one of those guys who is not at all a slot guy. I mean, a big 6'3", 250-pound guy, and at times looked really good. He obviously struggled with the health a little bit this year and wasn't on the field a ton, but you looked at how he played against Pitt. I mean, in that game, it kind of felt like he was their alpha dog, their number 1 maybe. And I think Hyatt kind of swallowed that role from him a little bit. But a guy who's got some traits that I think could be a really interesting player. I just don't think we saw enough consistencies for the last 2 years to put him up with those big dogs. But a guy, I feel like he's kind of got the game to do it.
Okay, I'm going to name 3, and I'm going to touch on him real quick, and then we'll probably touch on him when we go 6 through 10. One guy, Kayshon Boutte, obviously a super talented wide receiver that was almost everyone had him as a top 5 wide receiver coming into 2022. Now, he just struggled with, not only did he have some like off-season injuries, but him and Brian Kelly just did not get along on the same page. I don't have him in my top 5. I was never really that high on him. He was in my top 5 coming into the season. There just was never something like with all the other guys in my top 5, they do something really, really well that NFL teams will like. Kayshon Boutte, a little bit more of just a really well-rounded wide receiver. You could see him go above some of these guys because he can be more of a wide receiver 1X kind of guy. Another guy, A.T. Perry, a Wake Forest dude that not many people are talking about because he plays at Winston-Salem and no one talks about Wake Forest football. 6'5", 205 pounds. When you talk about vertical threats, I think A.T. Perry is a guy you have to be talking about. Caught 24 touchdowns in the last 2 years. Like, he's a touchdown machine. He's very good in the red zone. And then one other guy, just my favorite guy, and you're going to see some question marks about him. Nathaniel Tank Dell from Houston. There hasn't been many more productive wide receivers over the last 3 years than Tank Dell. He was the heartbeat of that Houston offense, back-to-back seasons of over 1,300 yards. He has over 30 touchdowns in his career at Houston. So much to love about him, besides the fact that he's 165 pounds.
Yeah, and he's a guy, I don't know. It feels like you always look at the numbers and they're always eye-popping, but then you kind of wonder about him even, and what is he going to do at the next level that's going to make him really special. Like, I don't know that he's going to run a crazy time. A good player, but I don't know. That he's going to be an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, I don't think he's a burner
at the Senior Bowl or any of those.
No, he's an underclassman. He's not a burner in my mind, but he's just he's a human joystick. When we talked about Josh Downs maybe being the shiftiest player in the class, Like Tank Dell would be the guy who's pushing him. If not, he is just very, very hard to track. Very good. Like if you're trying to cover him underneath the man coverage, you're not going to do it. Again, it's just 165 pounds. You have trouble seeing him stay healthy. Kind of like Greg Dortch coming out of Wake a couple years ago. Just so small that some NFL teams might just shy away from him unless he can put on some weight. Those are some of the names that we have. Again, let us know in the comment section who we're sleeping on, some potential players that we haven't talked about. We will be doing our 6 through 10 pretty soon. So we appreciate you guys checking us out. We have running backs next, so stay tuned for that. And again, we appreciate the support you guys have shown. If you did enjoy the content, consider subscribing. That helps the boys out a lot. We'll talk to y'all later.